хутка пачнем нашу прэзентацыю. Прэзентацыя будзе па-ангельску. Я ўсё ж прадстаўлюся па-беларуску, тому што мы знаходзімся ў Беларускім Моладзевым Хабе. Усіх вас вітаю у нашай прасторы, ў цэнтру Варшавы. Вельмі рады тое, што беларускія сацыёлагі, якія даследавалі беларусаў у Польшчы, іх адносіны да вайны, да дыскрымінацыі, наогул да сітуацыі і ў Беларусі, і ў самой Польшчы, звярнуліся да нас, каб правесці тут прэзентацыю сваёй такой працы. Вось, таму шчыра вітаю і калег-сацыёлагаў, шчыра вітаю паважаных гасцей. Спадзяюся, што вынікі гэтай прэзентацыі, вынікі гэтай працы дойдуць да тых рэцыпіентаў, якія змогуць паўплываць на стан беларусаў у Польшчы, наогул змяніць сітуацыю, якая склалася пасля пачатку вайны ва Украіне. Асаблівая падзяка фонду Фрыдрыха Эберта, які падтрымаў ініцыятыву правядзення дадзенага апытання. Ну і перадаю слова калегу Христоферу Форсту.
Thank you very much. So from my side now in English, switching languages. Unfortunately, Belarusian, I still can't speak Russian so-so, but feeling better in English. So first of all, thank you very much for hosting us here. That is always the first thing to say. Thank you very much for the authors of the study that's going to be presented today, and I think we'll have a lot of very interesting findings, and it was a great collaboration. So I would like to welcome you in the name of Friedrich Ebert Foundation Belarus, whose Friedrich Ebert Foundation is Germany's oldest political foundation, founded in 1925, committed to the values of social democracy since then. Among other things, we support obviously democratic development as well as peace and security in Europe, which are both very much in the focus of what we're doing here today and what we're going to have presented. I just came here from a short trip to Kiev, so I'm still a little bit under this impression, and I just have a 20 hours bus ride behind me, so sorry if I appear a little bit tired actually. But I'm starting with this because I think this is something, you know, the impression I'm still under, and obviously we're going to talk a lot about the war and the feelings Belarusians in Poland have about it and the impressions they have, so I think this is a good start to let you know that. We as FES have been working on Belarus from Ukraine fully since 2012 actually, since our registration back then in Minsk was not renewed, and we are still actually working in Ukraine even now, but we are sort of also all over Europe, so I have a little bit of a feeling what diaspora actually means, what today's presentation is about, even though of course limited due to the privilege I have. But the Belarusian struggle, which obviously started a long time ago and then was sort of amplified on the 9th of August 2020, also has the 24th of February 22 now as a date. I must say, I also know many Belarusians who came from Ukraine, so this is now also part of the diaspora. And no free Belarus without a free Ukraine as a slogan we are hearing quite often these days. The Belarusian Democratic Forces are using quite often. So it will be very interesting for us to hear how do Belarusians in Poland, and today it is about Poland, but actually this study will be continued, and there will be another presentation about Georgia and about Lithuania and how Belarusians there are thinking. But how do Belarusians in Poland actually think about this slogan? How do they feel about the war? Are they opposing the war? How many are assisting Ukrainians? But also what sort of discrimination are Belarusians abroad feeling in this context? We obviously have all a little bit of a different understanding of discrimination. I personally know many Belarusians who also have to struggle with all these legal challenges that are appearing these days. Obviously, frozen accounts, unclear residence status, and so on and so forth, but there are also everyday discrimination experiences. I already had a short look into the study, and I can tell you that I'm actually amazed by some of the findings. They are, without spoiling too much, so clear that I would have not expected that, and I hope that what we are going to hear today will be useful for advocacy, for raising awareness, and for just making clear where Belarusians are actually standing and what challenges they are facing. So I'm very much looking forward to the presentation. Thank you very much for being here, and hope you will enjoy it and find the findings useful. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much. My name is Ali Khalampio. I'm a kind of author of this research. Thank you, Foundation Friedrich Heber Project for Support Belarus for funding, and thank you for coming. Hopefully, it will not be completely awful. So let's get started. The first question: why or how it happened that we arrived at a decision that we needed to conduct this research. At the beginning of March, we started receiving information about various acts of discrimination or hostile reception of Belarusians living in Poland. And unfortunately, we viewed this information in various social medias, social networks, and Belarusian web pages, and so on. But unfortunately, it was completely impossible to understand the real extent of this problem at the time because of the nature of information we could find in social media. And but the one thing was absolutely clear, that we needed to ascertain this extent of this problem at the moment. We quickly worked out the questionnaire, and not so quickly found financial assistance. And in May, we finally collected data, and a couple of weeks finished our work on this research. And what problem, which problems we actually covered in our research? The first problem, assessment of the war in Ukraine by Belarusians living in Poland. The second question, assistance to Ukraine and Ukrainians from Belarusians living in Poland. And the last question, obviously, discrimination and hostility after the outbreak of war. It's obvious that this problem appeared soon after the war had broken out in Ukraine, and it's obvious that this is a kind of consequence, and we tried to figure out the real magnitude of this problem. Unfortunately, our time is short, and some of non-essential things. Okay, thank you. Our sample, surprisingly, we managed to collect, I would say, considerable, not considerable, but the data which can be considered reliable. We managed to involve in participation in this research more than 1,000 respondents. And as we can see, various social groups are presented, and there is one interesting moment that 73% of participants are people with higher education. And if I'm honest, I don't think that this is a bias. Or maybe these are our data a little bit biased, but we checked it, and I don't think that even if there is a bias here, it didn't really impaired in some way our outcomes. The first, this is an indication of specific of Belarusians living in Poland, and the specific is Belarusians are as a social group, really well-educated people. And as we can see, most of Belarusians participate in our research. Over 90% of Belarusians participate in our research arrived to Poland after the elections in August 2020. This is a kind of a natural. Belarusians either escaped from Belarus or no longer saw themselves in country under current circumstances. Geographically, all Poland is presented in our research as well, but obviously the most of the participants are from Warsaw and the central region. Traditionally, Belarusians like this place for logistics reasons as well. So, our first question: assessment of the war in Ukraine by Belarusians living in Poland. And our first question about support of Lukashenko's activities as a president. And as we can see here, it would be safe to say that there are no Belarusians supporting Lukashenko in Poland, and almost all Belarusians marked that they didn't support Lukashenko. As for the question of support of the side in the war, 94% of participants marked that they support Ukraine, 5% marked that they don't support any of the side, and just 1% of Belarusians, of participants of our research, support Russia. And the next question related to this problem is about the attitude of Belarusians towards contemporary Belarusian government and towards the activity of this government, towards the support, towards the fact of Belarus, official Belarus is a kind of ally, the only, thankfully, ally of Russia. And as we can see, almost all Belarusians are against, and 1% are marked hard to say. It's safe to conclude that there are no Belarusians who actually support what is going on in Ukraine. One more interesting issue here: who is blamed by Belarusians? Who is blamed by Belarusians for the war, for the starting of this war, for what is going on? And obviously, not obviously, expectedly, most of Belarusians think that most of Belarusians blame the start of the war, blame the war on Russia. And in first place, as we can see, Belarusians blame Russia. But many of them also think that Belarus is also to blame, and in this war, in the start of this war, is what is going on. And from my perspective, this is a kind of indication of difference between Belarusians and Belarusian government. All the aforementioned facts. In fact, Belarusians living in Poland, at least Belarusians living in Poland, have nothing to do with the actual policy of Belarusian government. Our next, here we can see some additional proofs to what I have said. Almost all Belarusians condemn the provision of Belarusian territory to Russian armed forces. Most of Belarusians agree that Belarusian armed forces should not take part in the war in Ukraine on the side of Russia. And many Belarusians, 32%, I think that this is a considerable rate, feel guilty for what is happening in Ukraine. And there is one more interesting moment. We also asked a question about participation of Belarusian armed forces in this war on the side of Ukraine. This question was in a very tricky form. Agree or disagree, Belarusian armed forces should not take part in the war in Ukraine on the side of Ukraine. As we can see, 43% of Belarusians marked disagree. This actually means that many Belarusians would rather agree to participation of Belarusians armed forces in the war on the side of Ukraine. But none of them, or almost none of them, would agree to participation on the side of Russia. Let's move on. Assistance to Ukraine and Ukrainians. As we can see, 33% of Belarusians living in Poland have already participated in some way in support, in assistance and help to Ukraine or Ukrainians. And this is a really high rate. And here I can divulge to comment on this information. This is a very interesting thing. I can divulge information from different research I'm conducting just now about the participation in support of Poles living in Poland. And this is an interesting thing that the rate of Belarusians, the share of Belarusians participated in support to Ukraine is higher. Not substantially, not considerably, but noticeably. As we can see, 83% of Belarusians participated in support to Ukraine. Among Poles, the share is 75%. So, moving on. Belarusians do help Ukraine, and this is a very interesting thing about the ways of participation and support to Ukraine of Belarusians. Obviously, Belarusians participate in rallies, in dissemination of information, in expression of solidarity in social networks. But the thing is that many Belarusians support Ukraine in ways which are, if I can put it this way, more demanding to resources. They donate money, they volunteer, they provide housing for refugees, they donate in form of clothes and so on. And on top of that, 59% of Belarusians, as we can see, agree that Belarusians should do more in order to help the people of Ukraine. This is a clear evidence of the real opinion and the real patterns of behavior, if I can put it this way, of Belarusians living in Poland with regard to the problem of war in Ukraine and the implications of this war. So, let's move on to the problem of discrimination and hostility. Here we can see that at least 31% of Belarusians living in Poland have already confronted discrimination or hostility, hostile reception here in Poland. Why did I say at least 31%? The fact is, we can consider here is that the data collection took part in the first half of May, more than months ago, and I think that we can assume that nowadays the share, this rate is higher, unfortunately. Yes, and also there is a very important moment about these forms of discrimination and hostility. As we can see, here most common case is the case of insults in personal communication, insults when communicated on the internet, and so on. But also there are there are some cases which, these cases of some sort of impersonal, quarrels, insults on emotional level, on interpersonal, it's not fine, it's not good, but it's something at least explicable to some extent. But there are some cases which are much more alarming, like refusal of service in bank, like hostility to a child in educational institution, like suspension from cultural events, like suspension from sport events. In some cases, there is one more interesting moment, refusal of service in public institution. This is kind of indication of something which I can entitle institutional discrimination. There is interpersonal discrimination or hostility, and there is institutional discrimination, which means that actually nowadays Belarusians are quite likely to encounter a situation when they are deprived of the rights which are granted for them by Polish and European Union legislation. This is something which is naturally quite close to apartheid, and this is really alarming. So let's move on. Next moment, quite interesting picture about about some specific traits of Belarusians and social groups. As we can see here, on the right, 84% of Belarusians who participated in help in Ukraine also encountered, vice versa, 83% of Belarusians who provided help to Ukraine also encountered discrimination or hostility here in Poland. And there is the thing that 73% down right corner, 73% are going to continue to help to Ukraine, despite the fact that they actually faced hostility or discrimination, despite that fact. So the next moment. Also, we asked a question which may appear a bit odd about people whom we know personally, about their own experience. The thing is that usually people are much more inclined to trust someone whom they know personally. And this is why this question is really important. If we encounter someone who we know personally who faced some sort of discrimination or hostility, we are inclined usually to trust and to consider this information in different way, in emotional way. And as we can see here, at least 84% of Belarusians living in Poland know personally someone who faced some discrimination or hostility, and we can see that these forms of discrimination are pretty much the same, but the order is a little bit different because of a little bit different perception when it comes to personal experience and when it comes to experience of other people. Some people are inclined, for instance, to hide some facts in personal communication. All these things put together, we have 58% of Belarusians living in Poland who either faced discrimination or hostility personally, or know someone who personally encountered this kind of situation. This is, if I'm honest, this is kind of horrifying rate. This actually means that discrimination and hostility towards themselves is is something which has become, for many Belarusians, has become a part of social life in Poland. Something which can happen to them. And Belarusians see Poland and Polish society nowadays as a society and country which is less comfortable, less friendly than it used to be several months ago. Many of them are inclined to expect some unfriendly situations, some sort of unfriendly situation. We're short of time, and unfortunately we cannot read all the quotes. We asked several open-ended questions in our survey, and but I think that it's a great idea to read just a couple of them. The first, problem at work from the management, problems at work at the management. They began to treat me badly and give me the most difficult part of the work. It did not happen before the war. Ukrainian women spread unfair gossip and invent all sorts of nasty things to make it even worse for me. I feel like an outcast. I haven't cried so many tears in my whole life since February 24, and I can't go home because of the persecution. One more. The excellent attitude of most Poles does not give some of them the right to discriminate against us. Denying only one person a job is a huge problem. I personally was close to suicide because of this. This is a kind of reflection of emotional perception of this problem of Belarusians living in Poland. Also we tried to assess the importance of this problem for Belarusians. As we can, we asked people to assess the importance employing the scale from 0 to 10. 11 points scale. And as we can see, on average, people assigned the value 5, which is not quite high, but definitely which is not low. People who encountered personally or who know someone who confronted this situation are inclined to consider this problem very important, and people who encountered personally but don't know someone who faced this situation inclined to assess this problem as a bit less important, but still quite important. So, as we can see here, most of Belarusians look to the future with anxiety. They are not sure that everything in their future will be all right. They also think that the war in Ukraine will negatively affect the situation of Belarusians in Poland. But almost all of them, or preponderant part of them, think that Belarusians don't deserve discrimination and negative attitude toward them. Some of them nowadays try to hide or try not to reveal their nationality without necessity. And some of them don't like to speak Russian in public places when they are surrounded by people they don't know. So the thing is, or the problem is that because of obvious reasons, our sample is far from being perfect. The problem is that we don't have a so-called sample frame, and therefore it's impossible to assess the biases in our sample. It means that in fact our sample is not in line with rigorous scientific requirements. And therefore we decided to double check our data. Nowadays, as I mentioned before, I participate in research of Polish Society of Poles when we asked people living in Poland several questions, which this is a result of different research, which also covered some issues related to international relationships in Poland and attitude toward different nations. And this survey of Poles is completely in line with main social demographic characteristics of Polish society. And the thing, as we can see here, this is a result of so-called social distance. And we can see that, obviously the shortest social distance is between poles to poles. But as we can see here down the chart, Belarusians, Arabs, Afghans, and Russians are nationalities which are treated in the most hostile way in nowadays Poland. And one more interesting chart which allows us to assume that that in fact the likelihood of Belarusians encountering hostile attitudes in Poland is relatively high. We can see here, this is a result of quite complicated mathematical analysis. And in fact, we see here unconscious factors of perception of social space by Poles when it comes to international relationships. Here we can see the point, the people I admire in the upper right corner, and the people that I don't like, the people that I don't like. And here we can see that Belarusians, together with Russians and Arabs, are nations which are very, very close in comparison with other nations to this point. This actually means that Belarusians are quite unlikely, or the likelihood for Belarusians to encounter unfriendly reception in Poland is higher than that for different nationalities, other nationalities, except for Russians and Arabs. So these are main results, and here I need to say a couple of essential things. The first thing is no one is to blame in this situation. We perfectly know that we didn't expect, some people expected or assumed that this could happen. I mean, the war in Ukraine, but definitely nobody expected that Belarusian would start encountering this kind of problems in Poland. And definitely Poles are not to blame, or Polish government is not to blame, definitely. And I don't think that we should focus on the problem who is to blame. The thing, what we should do, or what could be done in order to prevent bad things from happening, in order to mitigate the situation. The first, what should be done necessarily and as soon as possible is changing the discourse in the media. The thing is that the only context, or almost the only context, of mentioning Belarusians nowadays in Polish media in the context of war, and we can watch news on TV, and we are very likely to hear that Belarusians invaded Ukraine together, or Russians invaded Ukraine together with Belarusians, and as we can see, it has nothing to do with truth, with a real situation, with a real perception of Belarusians of all this stuff. And the first thing which is needed to be done is changes in media in Polish. There is a nice word I very like, Lukashenkowcy. People who support Lukashenko. There is a difference between Belarusians and Lukashenkowcy. Yes, and I think this is the first thing which is needed to be clarified in Polish media. This difference between Belarusians and people who support Lukashenko, difference between Belarusians in Poland, the things which Belarusians actually do in Poland in order to help Ukraine, not only in Poland, but in Ukraine as well. And the people who, not people, some social groups who support Lukashenko and its regime and his activities. And unfortunately, this is not clear nowadays. Unfortunately, Poles are very inclined, or Poles tend to confuse or see no difference between Belarusians and people who actually support, especially Belarusians living in Poland, and people who support what is going on in Ukraine and Belarus. So the second, unfortunately, just a couple of Polish officials reacted to the information about Belarusians encountering unfriendly reception in Poland. I think it's I think this is something really essential nowadays. Since, as I said before, Belarusians are confronting not only interpersonal, quarrels. They are also confronting institutional discrimination, and this means that Polish and European Union legislation don't work properly in Poland. This means this law exists, but what something has broken with law enforcement in this regard. And I hope that if some Polish officials said something in social networks, in media, it would considerably improve situation. It would be a sign for companies firing Belarusians, for companies denying to employ Belarusians, for Polish banks, that this is a position of Polish government, that discrimination of Belarusians is something completely inappropriate. But unfortunately nowadays we haven't heard anything like that. Just a couple of Polish officials on local level said something like that, but this is definitely not enough. The second, adoption of some sort of anti-discrimination measures. It's hard to say what they are supposed to look like, but some instruments of law enforcement, not only declaration on the media, but also it would be very helpful if some measures would be taken, if some measures taken in order to improve situation with law enforcement with regard of the aforementioned problems. So one more, I think which could be done is organization of some sort of service for appeals on issues of discrimination and hostility. It seems to be obvious, especially for people living in Poland and European countries, for citizens, that there are prosecutors, there are police, there are some institutions in which we can appeal with our problems. But now the thing is that Belarusians arrived here from country where protection of their law is considered a felony, by Belarusian government, and therefore they even when they understand, they see things from different perspective. They understanding that there are some ways they are very unlikely to try to do something because of the specific of their patterns of behavior and some patterns of their thinking. And I think that it would be really great if some measures would be done in order to simplify this process for Belarusians. And obviously, the last but not least, I suppose that some activities in order to prevent acts of discrimination and hostility towards Belarusians should be also done by Belarusian diaspora as well. Belarusian activists, it should become one of the focus of Belarusian diaspora. And sorry, we know perfectly that some of representatives of Belarusian diaspora have access to Polish, and not only Polish officials, but officials in other European Union countries as well, and not officials on the local level, but officials on the state level. So briefly, that's it. Thank you so much. Maybe there are some questions. Sorry, come again?
Hey.
I am very interested in your report. It is available on the
Thank you.
in the internet.
You mean the results in Polish and English? We are working on
English,
it.
in English, I prefer.
In English, in a couple of weeks we are working on it. Unfortunately, we are short of funds, and therefore we are trying to do our best in order to to figure out this problem.
I would like to explain why I am so interested, because I am involved in the network, European network of women, some feminists, and then we are dealing exactly with this kind of discrimination for Russian people living in
Thank you
Poland,
so much.
and as well in Belarusian people.
Thank you so much.
And then we are planning very soon the webinar on this issue related to the Belarusian.
Thank you so much. Please leave us your contact, and we will inform you as soon as English translation is ready.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say we'll send it to everyone on the participants list once it's ready, right?
Are there any questions? Are there any more questions? Suggestions?
Not a question, but then a suggestion. First of all, I'm very curious about the numbers for Lithuania and Georgia as well, and maybe that will also be once they are coming out in some time. That will also be something we can share with the participants here. Maybe interesting for you as well if you are actually involved in the European network, not just the figures for Poland. And I'm very curious whether they will differentiate actually. Secondly, I would say the discrimination experiences, you know, it just came from Ukraine, and there's obviously a big emotional, you know, many emotional, deep emotions involved, and it's not possible in such a situation to perfectly differentiate who are good Belarusians and bad Belarusians. So to some extent this is natural, but I think that the figures we have provided here, 0%, actually give a very good basis for focusing not so much on the discrimination experiences themselves, but on where Belarusians stand vis-a-vis the war and what their opinions of Belarusians here in Poland are. So I mean, if you Belarusians have been very good in campaigning in the last 2 years, and if I think of Sasha 3%, I mean, this is Russia 0%, right? So this is actually a very good opportunity to actually advocate and make clear where you stand, and this actually solves the discrimination to at least some extent. Some people can never be helped, but to some extent to bring this message clearer out is actually the way forward here, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Any more questions, maybe, from the audience? No? You could do it in...
Можно по-польску?
Или по-русски мы переведем.
Raczej mogę po angielsku, jak Państwo wolicie.
As you prefer.
Okay. So thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I am a member and a worker of a trade union, and I'm here because I would like to know what should we do to support Belarusians on Polish labor market. And for me, one of the most important information was that 17% of the group that met kind of a discrimination was refused, from 2 or 3% were dismissed, and 17% couldn't apply, for a job. So it's a huge number. For according to me, it's almost 20%. So it's a lot, and it's discrimination. It's it's not legal. They can ask Polish Inspectorate of Work to help. It's not legal, yes,
Definitely.
to dismiss because of that they are Belarusians. And according to you, what should trade unions do? How can we support Belarusians? If they need any about information about their rights, any campaigns, what do they need as workers? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I must admit this moment that I personally was very surprised that the extent of the problem is so large, so huge. That problem is really so serious. I didn't expect. I expected that there would be some difficulties, but I wouldn't expect that extent would be so serious. As for trade unions, the first thing coming up in my mind is working with Belarusians, because they do not know their rights. This is the first, and the second, they would be very reluctant to struggle for their rights defense, since they arrived, as I said, from Belarus, and this is a country where defending their rights is a felony. Is considered a felony by Belarusian government and these people, and also, and as I said, Belarusians understand that they have some rights and that there are some instruments, but nonetheless they are very reluctant to do something. And the first thing we need in terms of defending their rights on the labor market, we need to not only to explain them and to support them. And I understand that it's hardly can be implemented, to force them to start doing something, but to provide them some information, to clarify something. And also we know that Belarusians who are most likely to encounter this kind of situation are Belarusians which work on not highly qualified works, and they are more likely. And their Polish is more likely to be quite poor, and this is one more impediment for them. Now, I suppose that explanation not only their rights, but also explanation of the ways and some sort of support in terms of providing some specialists who know how things work. Thank you.
If I may add to that, based on the results of what we saw, actually, thank you very much for coming. And I think, to add to what Oleg just said, it would be beneficial, I think, to maybe inform the Polish working collectives actually about.
No, thank you, great
Yeah.
idea.
Of course, to help them, differentiate between Belarusians who actually, are in Poland and who we observe are completely against any kind of. They completely are on the side of Ukraine. They struggle against Lukashenko, and that people in Poland are. There is very little chance that a Belarusian in Poland is a person who would support this. I think this is something that should be communicated to working collectives, basically, and that's something that trade unions could do. Можно по-русски задать вопрос, если хочется, в принципе. Мы можем перевести.
По-белорусски так само.
По-белорусски, по-польски, не обязательно по-английски. Вопросы?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm the project manager of National Anti-Crisis Management Team. And I was just wondering if you have any information, is there any work already which is made on the adoption of anti-discrimination measures by the Polish government and officials? Maybe there is already some organization, some service that works with such appeals, or is it an urgent need that we have to organize such a service? And how can we involve the Belarusian diaspora? I mean, our, for example, people's embassies. How do you see that? Maybe this could be just like a, co-working, and we can make some initiative to face this and to work with this, organize some service, really. Or is there anything already working here in Poland?
Thank you very much for the first question. Unfortunately, there is no evidence for that something has already implemented or something exists. There is no evidence for that. We don't know.
So this is a food for thought, and we can,
yes. Yes, actually, this was one of our main intention to draw attention to this problem.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, can add a little bit to the previous one. As I know, the Polish Organization Ośrodek Monitorowania Zachowań Faszystowskich i Ksenofobicznych, oni zbierali informacje właśnie o tym, co się działo, i nie wiem, czy dokładnie z tym coś robią, bo im dużo czasu zazwyczaj zajmują takie sprawy, ale zazwyczaj biorą się za takie sprawy i później ich rozpatrzą. Co dotyczy tych, którzy zbierali od strony białoruskiej, to dwie organizacje na pewno zbierali informacje o dyskryminacji. To przede wszystkim Centrum Białoruskiej Solidarności, a tak samo By Help, a dokładnie Aleksiej Lewonczyk.
Bardzo dziękuję. Tak, ja bym powiedział tak, że słyszałem na przykład, że władze Krakowa mówili o tym, czy władze Sopota też mówili o tym, że taki problem istnieje, tak, i oni spróbują coś z tym zrobić, ale że oczywiście, że większość, że wszyscy patrzą na Ukrainę, wszyscy patrzą na Ukraińców, i jak było powiedziane kilka dni temu w TVN24, co mnie zaskoczyło, sam fakt, że o tym było mówione, że Białorusini dzisiaj stali uchodźcami drugiego gatunku. No, nie chcę się tak mówić, ale niestety w tym jest prawda. To też taki fakt, że przez ostatnie kilka dni zauważyłem, że w TVN24 stali coś mówić o tym, że problem taki istnieje. Słyszałem, ja osobiście słyszałem 2 razy o problemie dyskryminacji Białorusinów w Polsce. Mówili przez parę minut w TVN24 i jeszcze mówili o tym, że z Ukraińcami dzisiaj walczą za Siewierodonieck Białorusini. Wcześniej Białorusinie byli uzgadniani przez polskie media jak ludzie, którzy popierają Rosję. Tak? To coś się zmienia, chyba że ten problem zaczyna przyciągać jakąś uwagę. Tak.
tutaj widzę różne rekomendacje, ale tak dosyć sceptycznie podchodzę, żeby z polskim rządem rządzić, bo to się znaczy...
No oczywiście.
Tak. Natomiast polecam media niezależne. Radio Tok FM na pewno będzie zainteresowane tym problemem.
Spróbujemy skontaktować
jest
się
bardzo
z polskimi mediami.
i
Tak.
wszystkie takie tematy, które nie są w mediach innych przedstawiane.
No oczywiście, no to co chciałbym widzieć i co to myślimy mogłoby pracować, tak, no oczywiście, że to ciężko.
A jeszcze Rzecznik Praw Obywatelskich, też można się do niego zwrócić, bo nie jest zapisem, nie jest za tym rządem, który jest obecnie. Także można, bo on jest niezależny dalej.
Bardzo dziękujemy za poradę.
Oni się właśnie tymi rzeczami zajmują, tak samo Fundacja Helsińska.
Dziękuję. Pracujemy nad tym, tak? Będziemy rozpowszechniać. Bardzo dziękujemy za ciekawość i poradę.
Panie, dziękuję.
Я хочу еще добавить о том, что свыше 40 лет есть такая дискриминация и отношение к бывшим странам Советского Союза. Что касается до 40 лет, такой дискриминации, такого отношения к бывшим белорусам и украинцам такого нету. И это присутствует. Спасибо.
Может так, то trzeba, может быть так, на самом деле необходимо проверить и сделать, если для того, чтобы ответить на этот вопрос утвердительно либо отрицательно, необходимо установить, однако же, знаете, мне исполнилось недавно 40 лет, и вы меня немножко испугали. Спасибо.
Так а у тебя в этом исследовании, которые поляки, там нету различия?
Мы не обнаружили такого, чтобы было действительно существенного. Просто здесь, опять же, мы видим то, что в нашей выборке доля тех, кто после 40 лет, сравнительно невысока, потому что основная часть белорусов, живущих здесь, люди довольно молодые.
Не-не, я имею в виду исследование польской аудитории, там, где social distance, вот это вот, там нету такого?
Нет, по возрасту мы не сможем разделить.
So many languages today, you know. So we're going to finish in a few minutes. Maybe one last question. Okay, I see. So thank you so much, Oleg.
Thank you.
That was
thank you for coming.
Spectacular. Thank you. Thank you,
so
Christopher, for making it possible. And thanks to Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, of course, for making it possible. Thanks to Belarusian Hub, which is very welcoming and which provided us with this lovely venue. And thank you everyone for coming. I believe it was quite a, you know, good event which would bring some kind of impact, I believe.
Beneficial, maybe.
Yep.